Montana Territory. Spring of 1877, the day the snow melted off the ridgeline, was the same day Evelyn Carter decided she would not run anymore. The wind was dry and sharp, and the sky stretched wide and blue over the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains. Evelyn stood outside the small cabin she had claimed 3 months ago, her fingers wrapped tight around the straps of the saddlebags slung over her shoulder. Her boots were worn, her coat patched at the elbows, and her dark hair hung in a loose braid that reached the middle of her back. She had not spoken aloud in over a week. She did not trust gentle things. They never lasted. Behind her, the door creaked open. "Mama!" Evelyn turned, softening at the sight of her daughter's small face peeking out. "Back inside, Maybelle. Keep your brother warm." Maybelle nodded and disappeared. Evelyn exhaled slow. She had not meant to bring her children this far north. But after the last town, after the bruises and the shouting and the man who had said he owned her, she had taken what was hers and started walking. Michael and Maybelle were only 6 and 4. They never complained, even when they were hungry. Even when she cried at night and thought they could not hear. She stepped away from the cabin and toward the path that led down to the river. She needed water. The snow was melting, and that meant others would start moving through the land again. She would need to be ready. She always had been before, but she did not expect a rider to already be there. He was crouched by the river, filling a canteen. Big man, broad-shouldered. His horse stood behind him, calm and well-kept, and his rifle was slung over the saddle in easy reach. He wore a brown hat, boots that had seen years of work, and a coat with dust in the seams. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up. His eyes were steady. She stopped cold. One hand found the small knife she kept under her belt. He did not move. "You live up there?" he asked, voice low and even. "I do." He nodded once. "I will not come up without a skin. Just passin' through. Name's Dallin Graves." She did not answer. His eyes flicked to the knife. "You do not need that, but I get it." Evelyn's grip did not loosen. "What brings you out here?" "Herdin' cattle west. Got a small job waitin' near Missoula. I take the back trails. Easier on the animals." He gestured behind him, where 3 cows grazed near the trees. "Saw the smoke from your chimney. Did not mean to worry you." Evelyn studied him a long moment. He had not reached for his weapon. He had not looked her over like most men did. She took a breath. "I have 2 children inside," she said. That made his brow lift just a little. "Safe place for them?" "It is now." He nodded again. "Then I will stay down here." She hesitated, then walked past him to the river's edge. She knelt, filled her pail, and kept her back straight. When she stood, he was still there. "You need anything?" he asked. "No, all right." She turned and left. He kept showing up. Not close, not loud, but there. He made camp in the grove near the river and stayed for 3 days. Every morning, she saw him riding out to check the cattle, and every night, she saw the little glow of his fire. He never came to the cabin, never asked for food. On the 4th day, Maybelle brought in a bundle of wildflowers. A cowboy left these by the door. Evelyn stared at them. Small, blue, delicate things. She almost threw them in the fire. Instead, she set them in a jar. On the 7th day, she found him near the river again, mending a saddle strap. "You are still here," she said. He looked up at her. One of the cows calved. Could not move her far. "Just waitin' a little longer." She nodded. "You left flowers. They looked like something your daughter would like." She did. He looked at her for a long moment. "You do not trust men. I can see that." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I trust what I have learned. I reckon you have learned things the hard way." She stepped forward, closer than before. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because someone should be." That silenced her. He stood. You need help around here? I do not need a man. I did not say you needed one. I asked if you needed help. Evelyn stared at him. The wind pulled at her braid. Finally, she said, "The roof leaks." He smiled without showing teeth. "I can fix that." He did not ask questions. He did not push. Dallin fixed the roof, chopped firewood, showed Michael how to carve a whistle from pine. He never slept near the cabin, only in the grove. And he never touched her. Not once. But he looked at her like she was not something broken. One night it rained. Hard. Thunder rolled through the valley like distant drums. Evelyn lay on her cot, listening to the storm. Maybelle curled beside her. Michael slept near the fire. A knock came at the door. She rose, knife in hand again, and opened it just a crack. Dallin stood there, soaked through, hat in hand. "One of the cows went down," he said. "I tried to pull her up, but she slipped into the draw. I need a lantern." Evelyn handed one over. "Take this coat. I will be all right. You are shivering." He looked at her, water dripping from his hair. "You care." She hesitated, then stepped back and pulled her own coat from the hook. Held it out. "Take it." He did. That night, she stood at the window and watched the lantern flicker on the far hill. He came back near dawn, coat and lantern in hand, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She opened the door before he knocked. The first time he touched her, it was to brush hair from her face. She flinched. He pulled back fast. "Sorry." She shook her head. "It is not you." "I know." He waited a moment, then said, "I am not going anywhere." The first time he kissed her, she had just come in from hauling water. Her hands were raw, her face streaked with sweat, her dress clinging to her back. He took one look at her and stepped close. "Evelyn." She looked up. "May I?" She nodded just once. He kissed her like she was something precious. Like every bruise she had ever hidden did not define her. Like she deserved soft things. She burst into tears. He held her without asking why. By the time spring turned to summer, he had moved his camp closer. The children called him Mr. Dallin. Evelyn stopped locking the door. One evening, while the sun poured gold across the valley, Dallin knelt beside the garden bed he had helped her plant. The children were chasing fireflies. He looked up at her. "You do not flinch when I touch you anymore." "I still brace," she admitted. "But you let me." She nodded. He stood, dusted off his hands, and said, "I do not want to leave." Evelyn stepped forward. Her hand found his. "Then do not." He leaned in, kissed her again, slow and steady. "I am in love with you," he said. Her fingers tightened around his. "I am afraid of it. I will wait." She looked at him, heart pounding. No, no more waiting. And then she kissed him. He lifted her into his arms, and the children laughed in the background, and the stars began to come out. And for the first time in years, Evelyn knew she was safe. By late June, the cottonwoods along the river had thickened into full leaf, their branches whispering over the water like old women keeping secrets. Evelyn stood beneath their quiet rustle, holding a basket of laundry she just washed against the rocks. Her fingers were sore from wringing cloth, but her chest felt oddly light. She watched Michael help Dallin lay fence posts at the southern edge of the meadow. The boy mimicked every movement, his small hands gripping the post-hole digger beside Dallin's steady ones. His face set with concentration. Dallin didn't correct him much. He let the boy work, pausing now and then to point at the placement or offer a word Evelyn couldn't hear. There was no impatience in him, just an ease that made something in her belly loosen. Maybelle called from the porch. "Mama, there's a squirrel in the flower bin again." Evelyn sighed, shifting the basket to her hip. "Close the lid tight and let the dog in." "We don't have a dog." Then pretend we do. The girl giggled and disappeared back inside. Evelyn glanced once more at the field. Dallin caught her eye and raised his hand in greeting. She didn't wave back, but she didn't look away either. That evening, she found a rabbit already skinned and hanging by the cabin door. She hadn't gone hunting in days. When she stepped outside with her apron on, Dallin was crouched near the fire pit, sharpening a blade. "You set that trap?" she asked, nodding toward the rabbit. He didn't look up. "Figured you might need it." She set the apron aside. "I didn't ask you to." "No, doesn't mean I'm not grateful." He slid the knife back into its sheath, wiped his hands on his trousers. "I don't do things to be thanked. But you keep doing them." "I do." For a moment they stood still in the cooling dusk, smoke twisting up between them. "I've been thinking about building a second room," she said. His brow lifted. "The children are getting older." Michael kicked something fierce in his sleep. "And I'd like a space for myself." She hesitated. "For quiet. I can help." "I wouldn't ask you to do that." Dallin tilted his head. "When you stop thinking help is the same as a debt, you'll breathe easier." She stepped closer. "And when you stop pretending you've got nowhere else to be, maybe I'll believe you're staying." He touched the edge of her sleeve, not quite a grasp, just enough to feel the fabric. "I was never pretending." That night, she left the door unlatched. By mid-July, the foundation for the second room was half laid. Evelyn hauled stone from the creek bed while Dallin measured timber. She didn't ask how he knew so much about building. He didn't offer. But when he handled the hammer, his movements were sure. One evening, while he worked with Michael on the framing, Evelyn sat on the porch with a boiled potato in her lap and a pile of corn husks at her feet. Maybelle rested against her side, humming tunelessly. "You never talk about your people," Maybelle said suddenly. "Where you came from." Evelyn peeled another husk. "That's because it isn't a place I want to return to." "Do you miss it?" "No." Maybelle fell silent a while. Then, "Do you think Mr. Dallin misses anything?" Evelyn glanced toward the field. Dallin was laughing at something Michael said, shaking his head and reaching for another beam. "Maybe," she murmured, "but I don't think he'd say so." When the sun fell behind the pines, Evelyn brought out 2 tin cups and found Dallin by the edge of the field, rolling his sleeves back down. She handed him the cup. "It's cool tea. Chamomile." He drank. "You make it." Maybelle did. "She thinks it'll keep the bad dreams away." He watched her for a long moment. "Does it?" "I don't know yet." He passed the cup back. "I used to dream about drowning. Cold water. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every night for years. What stopped them? Nothing. They just faded." She didn't ask more. Instead, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers between his. "I don't want you to leave," she said quietly. "I won't. I need to believe that." "You will," he said. "When you're ready." She leaned against him, just enough to rest her head near his collar. He didn't shift, didn't draw away. His hand stayed warm around hers. When the first stars came out, Evelyn whispered, "I'm not afraid of quiet anymore." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "I know," he said, and she knew he meant more than just the silence. By early August, the ridge trails turned dry and brittle underfoot, and the scent of pine sap thickened in the heat. Evelyn had taken to waking before the sun crested the eastern hills, pulling water from the well before the day grew too sharp with heat. That morning, she found Dallin already outside, bent over a length of fresh-cut lumber, measuring notches with a carpenter's awl. "You don't sleep much anymore," she said, stepping into the shade beside him. He looked up, sweat already darkening the collar of his shirt. "I like the quiet before the birds start." She crouched to tie the laces on her boots. "I heard an owl last night. Thought maybe something had gotten into the henhouse. Could have been the wind through the trees. I know the difference. Dallin rested his forearm across his knee. You always listen so close? I had to, she said. In the years before here, listening was the only way to know when to run. He didn't answer right away. She didn't need him to. Instead, he tapped the edge of the board with the awl. This one's ready for the lintel. Want to help me lift it? Evelyn stood and dusted off her hands. You trust me with the heavy end? I trust you to carry what matters. He passed her the far side and together they raised the beam, fitting it into place above the new doorway. She steadied it while he drove the first nail. Later, while the children foraged for wild currants near the creek, Dallin set his tools aside and leaned against the unfinished wall. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. Evelyn wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. I used to think about the next mile, the next meal. That was all. And now, she picked up a scrap of wood, turned it over in her palms. Now I think about next spring, whether the seeds will take. If Michael's going to be tall like his father or broader like you. Dallin's gaze sharpened. You think about me in the years ahead? She didn't look away. You're in them. He crossed the few steps to her, slow but without hesitation. I've been offered a parcel west of the river. A fellow I knew from Fort Benton passed through last week. Said it's mine if I want it. Good grazing land. Shallow slope. Enough for a small herd and a cabin. Evelyn held his eyes. You thinking of taking it? I was, he said, until I realized I'd rather build here. She felt her breath catch not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty in his voice. I don't want to go back to drifting, he said. Not when I already found where I fit. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low. I never expected a man to stay without chaining him to something. You didn't chain me, he said. You gave me roots. She reached for his hand, calloused and warm, and pressed it to her cheek. You're not afraid of what I carry? No, he said, because I've carried my share too. That night, after the children fell asleep, Evelyn brought out her mother's quilt from the old cedar chest. The edges were worn, the stitching faded, but she unfolded it across the new cot Dallin had built beside hers. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her smooth the corners. You're settling me in then? She turned to him. I wouldn't unfold that quilt for just anyone. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I don't take it lightly, you know. I didn't think you did. He reached for her waist, drawing her close. Then let me say it plain. I love you, Evelyn Carter. I want to spend my years building what you've already begun. Her hands found his chest, steady beneath her palms. Then take your boots off and stay. He kissed her deep, sure, reverent. She didn't cry this time. She didn't flinch. When the oil lamp burned low and the wind shifted through the trees, she lay beside him and listened to his breathing, strong and even. It was the first time in her life she slept without listening for danger. And when morning came, she woke with his arms still around her and the sun warming the quilt, and for the first time in memory, she did not feel afraid. The first frost came early that year, a thin silver veil over the fields that hadn't yet browned. Evelyn stood at the edge of the pasture before sunrise, the hem of her shawl brushing her calves, breath curling in front of her face. Dallin had already gone down to the creek with Michael to check the traps they'd set the day before. She could just make out their lantern flickering low between the trees. Behind her, the cabin was quiet. Maybelle still slept, curled into the corner of the new cot Dallin had built for her with pine planks smooth as river stone. Evelyn had lined it with old quilts and a muslin pillow stitched with tiny pink flowers, her first attempt at sewing for comfort rather than utility. She walked the perimeter of the fence slowly, fingers trailing along the top rail. The posts stood firm, the wire taut. Woodpeckers had left small scars in one beam. She made a note to patch it before snow came. By the time she returned to the porch, the lantern was gone from the trees, and Dallin's voice carried low through the still air. 2 rabbits and a squirrel, he said, shouldering the burlap sack as Michael ran ahead toward the woodpile. Enough to dry? Or you want stew tonight? She stepped aside so he could pass. Dry the squirrel, stew the rest. He nodded and set the sack down near the chopping block. There's a doe with a limp on the far slope. Might be worth tracking. Evelyn picked a splinter from her palm. You think she's alone? Didn't see a fawn. She looked up. You could take her down? If I follow her quiet. He paused, then added, that was something I used to be good at, before I got used to sleeping through the night. She glanced toward the open door. I didn't know you'd stopped carrying your rifle to bed. I didn't feel the need to mention it. She stepped closer, brushing a twig from his shoulder. That's not nothing. Dallin's hand caught hers, held it briefly. That's everything. Maybelle appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Can I have honey in my tea? Evelyn turned. We're nearly out. I'll ride into town, Dallin said. If you've got a list. Evelyn hesitated. It's a long way for honey. There's other things we'll need before winter. Flour, salt, maybe a second hatchet. She crossed her arms. You've never been into town since you came here. I know. You sure that's safe? He held her gaze. I'm not hiding from anyone. She searched his face, then gave a small nod. Bring back thread, and a length of canvas if you find it. I'll leave after dinner. They didn't speak of what came before, of where he'd been or who might remember his name. She'd never asked if he'd had a woman once. He'd never asked about the children's father. That night, after the stew and before the lamps were lit, Dallin pulled on his coat and kissed her once, slow and certain. I'll be back by dusk tomorrow, he said. You ride careful. He touched the edge of her jaw. Always. The morning he was due back, Evelyn kept her hands busy. She churned butter, swept the floor twice, and set Maybelle to darning socks with thread too fine for the job. Michael noticed first how she kept looking at the road that curved through the trees, how she didn't sit to eat. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of ash, and a wind had risen from the west. Evelyn stood on the porch with her arms crossed tight, the shawl forgotten on the hook behind the door. Then she heard hooves. He came up the trail with a burlap sack tied behind the saddle and his coat snapped shut against the wind. She didn't step down, but her hands dropped to her sides, fingers unclenching. He dismounted and tied the reins. Canvas, thread, a tin of honey, and a few surprises. She didn't ask what the surprises were. Not yet. Inside, as the wind picked up and the children pored over the bundle of dried apples and a carved whistle Dallin had traded for, Evelyn boiled water for tea. He stepped up behind her, the canvas tucked under one arm. I saw a man in town I used to ride with, he said. She didn't turn. What did he say? Just nodded. I nodded back. And that was it? I didn't give him anything more. She poured hot water into 2 cups. You think he'll follow? No, she passed him a cup. Then that's the end of that. He took it, touched the rim to hers. You believe that? She met his eyes. I want to. He set the cup down, took hers from her hand, and set it beside his. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle, worn at the corners. There was a woman at the trading post. Said this came from a widow 2 towns over. Thought maybe you'd know what to do with it. Evelyn opened the cloth slowly. Inside was a spool of lace, soft and ivory, wrapped around 3 bone buttons. She traced the edge of the lace with her thumb. I haven't sewn a dress with anything this fine since I was 16. Maybe it's time you did. She looked up. You trying to make me into something softer? No, he said. Just something warmer. That night, she laid the lace beside her needlework and turned down the lamp. You sleep easy? He asked from his cot. She pulled the blanket higher. I do now. He reached across the gap and found her hand. Their fingers stayed twined until morning. The last of the leaves blew down in October gold and bone-colored scraps spinning along the fence line and catching in the brush near the stream. Dallin stood at the edge of the yard, sharpening the blade of the scythe Evelyn used to cut kindling. His breath came in thin clouds, and his coat was buttoned to the throat. Across the field, Evelyn crouched beside the root cellar, sorting jars of beans and cabbage by hand, her knees tucked beneath her skirt and her braid tucked into a wool scarf Maybelle had insisted she wear. He watched her for a moment longer than he meant to. Her movements were precise, careful in a way that wasn't cautious anymore, just steady. There was a difference. She didn't move like someone waiting for the next bad thing. When he stepped up beside her, she looked up from the open cellar door. You think this winter will be hard? He crouched beside her. Could be. Wind's colder this year already, but the roof's good. We've got meat hung and salt enough to last. You've done it before. She placed another jar aside. I've never done it with someone else. Well, you're not doing it alone now. They didn't speak again until the jars were stacked in rows, and the cellar closed and covered with straw. Then Evelyn straightened, brushed her palms against her apron, and turned toward the cabin. You think the posts will hold through the freeze? I packed the earth tight, he said. Only thing that'll test them is time. Inside, Maybelle was bent over a page of letters Evelyn had copied for her on scrap parchment. Michael sat cross-legged near the hearth, whittling a small wooden horse, the shavings curled like ribbon near his boots. The fire burned hot and low, and the scent of rosemary clung to the air from the biscuits Evelyn had baked that morning. Dallin stepped out again after dark and returned with an armful of pine boughs and a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Evelyn raised an eyebrow when she saw him unroll it beside the fire. You trading again? He nodded. Swapped for it with a man who keeps bees. Said his wife used to make salves before she passed. Gave me her old recipe. Evelyn took the folded parchment he offered and read the careful script. You want me to make it? No, he said, reaching into his coat for a small tin. I already did. She opened it. The scent was sharp with honey and pine resin. She dipped a fingertip in and rubbed it over the raw skin near her knuckle. You've been watching, she said softly. I watch everything about you. She closed the tin and handed it back. You planning to keep doing that? If you'll let me. The wind howled once against the wallboards. The children had gone quiet. Maybelle curled in her cot and Michael tucked beside the hearth. Evelyn lit the lamp low, then turned to him. I've been thinking about that lace, she said. The one you brought from town. He leaned against the table. You find a use for it? I want to stitch it to the collar of a new dress. A blue one. Something I don't wear to dig or cook or haul water. Dallin didn't speak, just waited. She stepped closer. I want to wear it when I stand beside you. He reached for her hand. Evelyn, you sure? I've never been more. He brought her fingers to his lips. Then let's call it what it is. She nodded. A wedding. They were married 3 weeks later, just before the snow came. It was a quiet morning, pale and still. Dallin shaved and polished his boots. Evelyn wore the blue dress she'd sewn in secret, the lace stitched into the collar with a needle so fine she'd had to pause between every loop to steady her eyes. Michael carried the ring Dallin had carved from a strip of silver traded 2 winters ago. Maybelle brought a handful of dry lavender from the garden to tuck into Evelyn's braid. The preacher rode in from the next valley, and the words he spoke were short and solemn, spoken beside the hearth with the children standing close. After, Dallin said, I never thought I'd belong anywhere, but I do now. Evelyn rested her hand over his heart. We built this. Together. He kissed her there, in front of the fire, with the scent of wood smoke and bread rising in the air. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the sheer fullness of it. And when the snow came that night, it came gentle, blanketing the ground in a hush. Inside the cabin, the four of them sat close, the lamplight warm against the windows. Dallin read from the old book Evelyn kept in the cedar chest. Maybelle fell asleep first, then Michael. Later, in the dark, Evelyn lay with her head against Dallin's shoulder, her hand curled over his ribs. You feel it? She whispered. He turned toward her. What? Peace. He drew her close. Yeah. I do. And they slept, wrapped in quiet and warmth, the world outside buried in white. Years passed. The cabin grew, room by room, as the children grew taller and the garden spread wider along the slope. Evelyn taught reading to the neighbors' children when spring came. Dallin raised cattle and mended fences and carved toys in winter. They never spoke of the lives they'd left behind, only the one they'd chosen. Michael built a shed of his own by the time he was 16. Maybelle planted wildflowers in rows along the porch. Every morning, Evelyn would step outside with a cup of tea and watch Dallin walk the pasture, his shadow stretching long behind him. And every night he came home to her. There was no more running, only a life made steady by two hands joined, by days built in quiet, by love that had weathered all things and held. They were safe, and they were home,